Good afternoon. I'm Keval Datani, and today I'm joined by Natasha Riga-Jones, Amy Preston, and Abdi Boué. Welcome to Warwick Congress Weekly. This week, we'll be talking about a lot of news stories that have been quite prominent in the news over the past few weeks, including Putin and US election meddling, and of course, Sergei Skripal's poisoning case. But first, we're going to tell you a bit about Warwick Congress, who we are, what we do, and how we do it.
Warwick Congress is one of the fastest growing student-run initiatives in the UK that aims to unite the disciplines of finance, economics, politics and law into a single platform. To stay up to date with everything we do, sign up for free membership on our website, www.warwickcongress.com.
Our hope is that Warwick Congress Weekly can inform our listeners, so if you have any questions, queries or opinions, then please message in and let us know. You can do so by going to www.radio.warwick.ac.uk and pressing the message tab on the top right corner. You can also tweet us at raw1251am.
For our first story of the week, we've got some news on Steve Bannon and his involvement with the French National Party.
Steve Bannon, President Trump's former advisor, has caused a stir by telling a far-right gathering in France on Saturday that they should handle accusations of racism with pride.
So what did Steve Bannon say?
Let them call you racist, Bannon said to the French National Front Party. He went on to say that they should let them call you xenophobes, let them call you nativists, and wear it as a badge of honour. Bannon told the National Front crowd that he had learned from travelling the world that history is on our side and that the globalists have no answers to freedom.
So it sounds like Bannon's been quite vocal since he left the White House. So what did he have to say about President Trump, if that's what he had to say to the French nationals?
At a news conference following his speech, Bannon said frequent staff departures from Trump's administration represented a clash with the president's core agenda. Instead of pursuing an anti-globalist stance, Bannon said that President Trump is pivoting toward economic nationalism in a bid to prepare for upcoming midterm elections.
So why was he speaking to the French National Party? It sounds like it's not really his area of expertise.
Since being relieved of his duties, first at the White House and then Breitbart, Bannon has been involved in a European tour, visiting cities such as Zurich, Milan and Rome to support far-right movements. Last week, Bannon appeared in Rome to observe the elections and advocate for an alliance between the anti-immigrant League Party and the populist Five Star Movement in Italy. Bannon's visit to France was part of a wider strategy by Marine Le Pen, leader of the front-right National Party, to reassert her personal and political authority after a fall in popularity following a crushing defeat by Emmanuel Macron in last year's presidential election. Still, critics have suggested that inviting Bannon to the conference was a bad idea and didn't show the maturity Le Pen was accused of lacking during the election last year.
So, kind of, what does this mean for Bannon going forward then? What's next for him, I guess?
Well, firstly, Bannon's exile has seen him lose a sense of influence and command over the anti-establishment movement he cultivated back in the United States. Bannon perhaps is trying to use Europe, a bedrock for populist sentiment, to reinvigorate his political career. Back at home, Bannon is finishing off the final pieces to his think tank that will be aimed at, in his words, weaponising populist ideas. He may not have the relevance he once did, but Bannon is certainly not going away anytime soon.
And another story not too far away from that is something that's been quite prominent in the news over, I guess, the last 18 months, and that's meddling in the US elections.
Yeah, so during an intense interview with NBC News' Megyn Kelly, the Russian President Vladimir Putin repeatedly denied ordering a prolonged and intricate campaign in order to sabotage the 2016 US presidential election. And instead he suggested that Russian minorities, such as Jews or Tatars, could be behind it.
And those comments by Putin were met with, as you'd expect, quite a scathing response. So why were his comments so controversial?
Yeah, so his comments were criticised by the Anti-Defamation League, with Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the league, stating, "It is deeply disturbing to see the Russian president giving new life to classic anti-Semitic stereotypes that have plagued this country for hundreds of years." And the reason why Putin's comments are so controversial is that historically, Jews living in Russia have been persecuted under various Tsars, with their livelihoods and residence often being limited. And whilst Jews were recognised as a national group, their kind of practicing of their religion was kind of strongly discouraged. And this is why his comments are so damaging in terms of the fact that it kind of harks back to an era of persecution and almost kind of legitimises it in a way.
So it sounds like there's more to the story than just Putin's comments. So how do his comments fit into the wider situation concerning Russian interference in the US presidential election?
Yeah, so last
I'm
month...
going to have to redo that because I had my microphone off. So there's obviously more to this story than just Putin's comments. So how do his comments fit into the wider situation concerning Russian interference in the US presidential election?
Yeah, so last month, Special Counsel Robert Mueller indicted 13 Russian nationals and 3 Russian entities for allegedly meddling in the US presidential election, charging them with conspiracy to defraud the United States. And kind of throughout his interview with NBC, Putin kind of continually rejected the notion that the Kremlin was involved. And when asked why Russia wouldn't interfere, he insisted that the country didn't have the desire nor the means to do so. However, his kind of denial of interference does run counter to assessments by US intelligence agencies, which stated in a report in January 2017, so quite a while ago, that the Russian government did interfere in the presidential election to help Trump win by hacking Democratic targets, facilitating damaging releases through WikiLeaks, and using social media to spread misinformation and fake news. And the report clearly states that it was Putin who ordered this meddling effort. So there are kind of controversies there in terms of who was or wasn't involved. And it doesn't really look like the story's going to come to a swift conclusion. And so for Trump to kind of maintain this friendly relationship with Putin could become increasingly difficult as kind of more evidence is found.
So I guess another area where President Trump has been in the news is where he wants to pretty much have his own military parade. So Abdi, I believe you got an update for us on that.
Yeah, definitely. So a military parade was requested by President Trump, and it will take place on the 11th of November, which is Veterans Day in Washington, D.C., which the Pentagon confirmed. The announcement comes after Trump had asked the military to organise a show back in January, following his visit to France, where he had been impressed by the Bastille Day parade celebrations.
So do we know what Trump's, I guess, military parade, what sounds like more of a show, do we know what it will feature?
Yeah, so Pentagon said that the parade or show will travel from the White House to the Capitol and will feature a heavy air component at the end. The parade will focus on the US military veterans through the ages, starting with the American Revolutionary War. And despite the fact that US military parades are only used to mark victory at the end of war, Trump has been quite vocal in his attempts to put on a show that would top the Bastille Day celebrations.
So is everyone in support of this proposed parade?
Not quite. So US Defense Secretary Jim Mattis has said that the planned parade demonstrates the president's affection and respect for the military. However, Democratic politicians have criticised the expense and said that such ideas carrying quite worrying symbolism. Also, it's been so stated by Representative Jim McGovern that Trump acts more like a dictator than president and that Americans deserve better. Several retired military personnel have also condemned the plan, saying that money would be better served improving conditions for veterans or raising military wages. In February, Trump told Fox News that he wouldn't hold the parade if the cost was exorbitant. Alarmingly for critics, the White House's budget has come out, or budget chief, has come out and said that taxpayers will have to pay up to £21 million or $30 million, suggesting Trump has kind of gone back on his word. So
it does sound like quite an, I think the word you used is exorbitant cost there. And another major US story that we have covered over the last few weeks has been to do with gun laws, and we have an update for you on the ban on US bump stocks.
Yeah, so the US Department of Justice has made the move to ban bump stocks, which are accessories for high-capacity rifles that are designed to make them fire more easily. The Department of Justice submitted a notice for approval to the Office of Management and Budget, and in this notice, the DOJ proposed that bump stocks be included in the definition of machine gun in the 1934 National Firearms Act, and this act forbids machine guns.
And we've seen, obviously, that this gun laws are quite a touchy subject in the US, so how much opposition do you anticipate that the move will face?
Well, of course, this decision from the DOJ may anger the majority of the Congress, with most Republicans being adamantly against banning bump stocks. They see it as an infringement of the Second Amendment. It's clear that the National Rifle Association, or NRA, do not support this. Since on Friday, the association filed a lawsuit against Florida Governor Rick Scott, who signed into law new gun regulations which included a bump stock ban. So this is in clear opposition to what President Trump has been saying for the past few weeks. Trump has supported the ban on bump stocks and other attachments that enable rifles and semi-automatic weapons to fire like a fully automatic one. The Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, said in his statement responding to the ban that President Trump is absolutely committed to ensuring the safety and security of every American, and he has directed us to propose a regulation addressing bump stocks.
So, what do you think this will mean going forward for President Trump and his relationship with Republican lawmakers, given this is in contrast to what you would say their interests are?
Well, it's definitely going to be interesting to see, just to see how Trump deals with Republican lawmakers, and also the NRA, who has donated $30 million to him for his election campaign. Another interesting point to consider is that this move will not require congressional approval, allowing the White House to ignore the calls from Republicans in the House and Senate, and the huge influence of the NRA to retract the ban. So, as a result, I wouldn't be surprised to see many of these figures continue to voice their disapproval at the ban.
So it's something that we will keep you updated on when we do have more updates. And our final US-related story concerns Rex Tillerson. So Abdi, what have you got for us there?
So US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson arrived in Chad yesterday, stating that the US could lift travel bans on its important partner, was the term he used, in the fight against terrorism. This comes amidst his diplomatic tour of Africa, which started last Wednesday, and it comes at a time where the US trying to mend fences with African states after President Trump made derogatory comments towards the continent.
So why is Tillerson's statement on Chad significant then?
Well, Chad were furious when Trump included the country in his administration's visa ban list, despite being a key ally to the US in the fight against Islamist groups, which have plagued the West Africa region. Tillerson said that Chad made important steps to strengthen control over security and passports, and said to the press that these steps, I think, are going to allow us to begin to normalise the travel relationship with Chad. Tillerson is also the highest-ranking US official ever to visit Chad, which is significant for relations between the two countries. He met with President Idris Deby, whom he had previously met before while negotiating for a major oil contract when Tillerson was CEO of ExxonMobil.
So how has Tillerson's time in Africa gone, I guess? What's happened?
Well, it's been rather a truncated tour with stop-offs in Kenya, Ethiopia, Djibouti and Nigeria, all who are key allies against Islamic State and other extremist groups. However, it's also announced that Tillerson has cut short his trip in Africa and left last night to attend to important matters in Washington, D.C., including the ongoings in North Korea. It'll be quite interesting to see whether this trip will have its intended effect of fixing ties with African states who are keen in fighting extremism in the continent.
Another quite significant piece of news coming out of the African continent was from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where President Joseph Kabila of the Democratic Republic of Congo signed a new mining code into law on Friday that increases taxes on mining firms and also doubles government royalties from the industry, despite fierce opposition from international mining companies. The Democratic Republic of Congo's mining industry, which also produces diamond, tantalum, tin and gold, as well as cobalt, is the country's largest source of export income.
So why have foreign firms opposed this new law then?
Well, foreign mining firms could strongly oppose the law, saying their operations in the Democratic Republic of Congo would stop being profitable with these new taxes in place. And several chief executives flew to the Congolese capital Kinshasa this week in the hopes of persuading Mr. Kabila to change his mind.
And why is cobalt so important?
Well, the Democratic Republic of Congo is Africa's biggest producer of copper and cobalt, which is a vital component in mobile phone batteries, and it provides more than 60% of the world's cobalt. And prices for cobalt more than doubled last year thanks to an increased demand for electric cars who also require cobalt for their own batteries. And sales of electric cars rose by 57% in 2017 to more than 1.2 million, with China accounting for over half of the global electric vehicle sales. So with such a large market to tap into, as well as the growth of companies like Tesla, it's hardly surprising that this move has come from the Congolese government.
I mean, it sounds like this will have quite a big effect in terms of mining code. So can you tell us a little bit more about how this will be affected?
Yeah, so Matthew Hansen, who's an analyst at Numis, has warned that the increase in royalties will ultimately see less investment into the country, which could help the global cobalt price in the long term as less projects are developed. And royalties on cobalt could also more than quadruple if the government labels it a strategic substance. The expected effect of the tax is that prices will rise for consumers, which could have a significant knock-on effect for mobile phones and electric vehicles, depending on the extent of a price rise. So that could be something that we all see in the near future. And now, as always, we have a selection of financial news for you from the past week. The EU and Japan pressed the US to exempt them from steel and aluminium tariffs on Saturday as the three sides met in Brussels as part of a trilateral effort to combat unfair trade practices. EU Trade Commissioner Cecilia Malmström said there was no immediate clarity on the exact US procedure for exemption. However, so discussions need to continue next week. President Trump is strongly considering Christopher Liddle, a former executive at Microsoft and General Motors, to succeed his departing top economic advisor Gary Cohn. Liddle is currently the White House's Director of Strategic Initiatives and has worked closely with Jared Kushner on efforts to streamline and update government functions. It's unlikely that Greece will require a precautionary credit line after its bailout ends in August, according to the head of the European Stability Mechanism, Klaus Regling. Mr. Regling said it very much depends on whether it's really needed, and he went on to say, if everything remains quiet, reforms continue and Greece continues to develop its market access, then based on what we know today, it's probably not needed. The IPO of Saudi Aramco could be delayed from this year until 2019 at the earliest, with advisors struggling to arrive at the $2 trillion valuation sought by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, according to the Financial Times. The wait could also represent a setback to Saudi efforts in reforming its economy, as the Aramco listing, which would likely be the world's largest ever IPO, is seen as a linchpin of its strategy. Tesla has confirmed a temporary Model 3 production suspension during a week in late February, as it targets 2,500 units per week by the end of the first quarter and 5,000 a week by the end of the second quarter. Tesla said that these periods are used to improve automation and systemically address bottlenecks in order to increase production rates. This is common in production ramps like their own. And finally, Black Panther is continuing its massive winning streak, and this weekend it crossed the $1 billion global box office mark in just 26 days of release, with a little help from a solid Friday debut in China, making it Disney's 16th movie to hit the $1 billion milestone, as well as the 5th Marvel film to do so. Black Panther's US box office total is also good enough to make it the 9th biggest box office of all time. So that's some quite significant news there, and probably some quite happy faces on the Disney board. A story that's been covered quite a lot in the UK has been the poisoning of Sergei Skripal. So Tash, what have you got for us?
Yeah, so Prime Minister Theresa May is believed to be close to publicly blaming Russia for the poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal in Salisbury, after the former Russian spy, who's 66, and his 33-year-old daughter were found slumped on a bench in the cathedral city just 9 days ago, suffering the effects of a nerve agent, and they are still in a critical condition. And whilst the nerve agent in question hasn't yet been identified, the advice that's been given to people in the local area is to wash their clothes and other items that might have come into contact with the nerve agent, with traces of the substance being found at the Mill pub and Zizi restaurant, with up to 500 people thought to have been in the venues between Sunday lunchtime and Monday night, so quite a few people are affected here. And this guidance reinforces suspicions that the nerve agent used on Skripal and his daughter was first administered inside the Zizi restaurant, with traces of contamination having been reportedly found on and around the table where they sat, and with some of the furniture and other items at the restaurant having been destroyed to prevent any further poisonings.
So who's thought to be behind the poisoning then?
Well, senior government sources have stated that police and security services have established enough evidence to link Moscow to the attempted killings, with Theresa May having chaired a National Security Council meeting yesterday, which included senior ministers and intelligence and military chiefs. And so it's expected that as a result, Russian diplomats and spies could be expelled from the UK, with new financial sanctions also being placed upon Russia. However, some are unconvinced that Russia is actually behind the attempted murders, with Nikolai Siplakov, who was a resident of the same building as Skripal's family in Moscow, stating that there was actually no proof that Russia was involved. And he basically said that because Skripal was a former spy and a traitor of Russia, if Russia kind of wanted him dead, they would have killed him a long time ago. So there is some kind of controversy as to who is involved.
Yeah, some quite strong words there from his former neighbour. So how do we expect Theresa May to respond?
Yeah, well, senior ministers such as Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson have kind of urged her to kind of take a stronger stance against Russia, with Boris having accused Russia of acts of war, which is highly inflammatory language there. So May has been kind of criticised